Story 1. The Voices of the Royal Hawaiian. There's a kind of desolation you can only find in the desert, a silence so deep it feels loud, like it's pressing in on you. It's in this oppressive quiet that our first story begins, with a solo explorer named Marcus, who decided to check out the remains of the Royal Hawaiian Motel in Baker, California. By the time he got there, night had fallen, cloaking the scorched landscape in total blackness. The motel was an easy find, a skeletal structure rising from the flat earth, with no fences to guard its decay. Marcus was no amateur. He actually preferred exploring at night to avoid the brutal desert heat. Armed with a high-powered flashlight, he started his survey. The place was a wreck. A deep graffiti-covered swimming pool gaped like a wound in the earth. A fire had clearly torn through part of the building, leaving behind blackened timbers and the faint, bitter smell of old smoke. It was the typical scene of neglect he expected. He started on the ground floor. The rooms were mostly empty, just broken furniture and thick layers of dust that seemed to swallow the sound of his footsteps. The walls were a mess of spray-painted tags. He wondered if transients ever used the place, but it felt too remote. As he moved from room to room, a feeling of unease started to creep in. It wasn't the usual tension of exploring a derelict building. This was a palpable, chilling sense of being watched. He was about to head for the stairs when he heard it. A voice. It was faint, feminine, and seemed to come from just around the corner. Not a word, just a soft, mournful sigh. Marcus froze, his heart slamming against his ribs. He clicked off his flashlight, plunging himself into absolute darkness. His training kicked in. If you hear someone, assume they're dangerous. He flattened himself against a grimy wall, every nerve alive with adrenaline, and just listened. Nothing. The profound, pressing silence of the desert was back. After a minute that felt like an hour, he risked turning his light back on. He crept forward, his feet silent on the dusty concrete, and peered around the corner. Nothing. Just another empty corridor. He tried to rationalize it. The wind, an animal, his own mind playing tricks. But the sound had been so distinctly human. Shaken, he decided to check the second floor. Upstairs, the walkway was littered with broken glass that crunched under his boots. As he moved, a new sound reached him. A rhythmic banging. Thump, thump, thump. It was slow, deliberate, and coming from a room up ahead. This was no animal. This was a person, he was sure of it. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but a morbid curiosity pushed him forward. As he got closer, it stopped. "Hello?" he called out, his voice sounding weak. "I'm just an explorer. I don't mean any harm." No response. The silence that followed was more menacing than the noise. He reached the doorway of the room. The door was gone. The smell that hit him was nauseating, a thick stench of filth and decay. He killed his light again, letting his eyes adjust. He was almost certain he could see a shape, a human silhouette, standing perfectly still against the back wall. His hand trembled as he raised his flashlight, pointing the beam at the ground before sweeping it up into the room. The room was empty. No one was there, just a filthy mattress and more graffiti. But the feeling of being watched was now overwhelming. The air felt thick, charged with a hostile energy. That was enough. Marcus turned and fled, not stopping until he was back in his car, peeling away into the desert night. Whether he'd encountered a ghost or a very dangerous squatter, he never wanted to find out. Story 2. The Shadow in the Mine. Some places are abandoned for a reason. Maybe they're built on unstable ground, or maybe their purpose just faded away. But some places feel like they were abandoned because something evil took root, tainting the very earth and stone. This is a story about one of those places, an old, forgotten cement mine, and the group of explorers who ventured into its depths. The entrance was a scar in the hillside, a dark maw exhaling a cold, damp breath. The group, 4 friends, hesitated. Around the entrance, spray-painted symbols formed a disturbing ring. One symbol, repeated over and over, looked like a monstrous open mouth, stained with a reddish-brown paint that looked unnervingly like dried blood. It was a huge red flag, hinting at something darker than simple vandalism, something ritualistic. Against their better judgment, they pushed on. The air grew colder with every step, the only sounds their hushed whispers and the drip, drip, drip of water. The mine was a disorienting labyrinth of tunnels, and the weight of the earth above them felt immense. They had been walking for maybe half an hour when they reached a large cavern. The air here was strangely still. One of the explorers, Josh, was scanning the far end when his flashlight caught something. He stopped, his breath catching. "Guys," he whispered, his voice tight with fear. "You need to see this." The others aimed their lights where he was looking. There, at the edge of the darkness, stood a figure. It was tall and impossibly thin, shaped like a person but with no features. It was a pure black shadow, a void in the space it occupied. Then, as Josh held his light steady, 2 points of light ignited in its head, reflecting the beam with a cold, predatory gleam. They were like an animal's eyes, but there was an intelligence there, a malevolent awareness that froze them to the spot. Panic set in. Was it a trick of the light? A person in some kind of bizarre camouflage? Or was it something else, something that shouldn't exist? The figure just stood there, watching them, its glowing eyes unblinking. One of them, Sarah, let out a terrified whimper, and the spell was broken. They turned and ran. They didn't scream, they just fled, their footsteps echoing wildly through the tunnels. Terror gave them a sense of direction they hadn't possessed on the way in. The fear of what was behind them was so much worse than the fear of getting lost. When they finally burst out of the mine, gasping in the night air, they sprinted to their car and sped away. They had stumbled into a place that wasn't just abandoned. It felt occupied, claimed by a presence that did not want to be disturbed. They had explored the edges of the unknown and found something looking back at them from the abyss. Story 3. The Ghost Town Farm. Sometimes the most unsettling discoveries aren't supernatural, but deeply tragically human. Our third story takes us to a desolate, abandoned pig farm, a place that felt to the explorers who found it less like a derelict property and more like a modern-day ghost town. Two friends, Chloe and Ben, had heard whispers of the old farm, but found no history about it. When they finally located it down a long, overgrown lane, the atmosphere was immediately unnerving. They started with the barns. Inside, the air smelled of rust and rot. Empty pens stood in silent rows, but mixed in with the decay were signs of more recent activity. Empty beer bottles, a dartboard, fresh-looking graffiti. It seemed like a local hangout spot, which put them on edge. You never know who you might run into. It was in the main farmhouse that things went from typical to deeply disturbing. The house was a wreck. In what looked like a child's bedroom, they found a small pile of homework papers on the floor. Chloe picked one up. It was a math worksheet, dated in neat handwriting, 1983, a relic from a past life. But in the living room, the timeline became chillingly blurred. In the corner was a small, dirty sleeping bag. It wasn't old and rotted. It looked like it had been used recently. And surrounding this lonely sleeping bag was a collection of children's toys and books, a worn teddy bear, a few plastic cars, and a stack of modern picture books. A cold dread washed over them. This wasn't a party spot. This was a home. Someone was living here. But the toys raised a far more disturbing question. Was a child living here too? They pictured a small kid huddled in that dirty sleeping bag, in this cold, decaying house. The silence of the house no longer felt empty. It felt heavy with unspoken sorrow. They were trespassers in someone's desperate sanctuary. The thought of who might return was terrifying. Chloe and Ben backed out slowly, their exploration cut short by a profound sadness and fear. They left the farm as they found it, a place caught between two timelines of abandonment. The mystery of the family from 1983 was now tangled with the mystery of the person and the child, seeking shelter there today. It was a stark reminder that the true horrors lurking in abandoned places aren't always ghosts, but the very real tragedies of human existence. Story 4. The Silent Occupants. Urban explorers know the risks: unstable floors, hazardous materials, stray animals. It's all part of the territory. But the most unpredictable danger is other people. Squatters or criminals can turn an adventure into a fight for survival. This account, from two explorers named Liam and Noah, is about what happens when you find out you're not alone. The building was a massive derelict office complex. They slipped in through a broken window just after dusk. The inside was a maze of decaying cubicles and shattered glass. They were deep inside the building when they heard voices, low and guttural, coming from the other side of a bank of cubicles. Liam and Noah immediately dropped into a crouch, hearts pounding, and killed their lights. There were at least 2 men. Their voices were low, conspiratorial murmurs. They were rummaging through something, the sound of debris being kicked around. Liam and Noah couldn't make out the words, but the tone was aggressive and sharp. These weren't kids messing around. These men sounded dangerous. Hiding behind a desk, the 2 explorers exchanged terrified glances. They were trapped. The men were between them and their only way out. They had to find another exit and do it silently. For what felt like an eternity, they waited, listening to the men move nearby. Every scrape of a boot, every muttered curse, sent a fresh wave of fear through them. Finally, the sounds moved further away. This was their chance. Moving with a stealth they didn't know they had, Liam and Noah began to creep in the opposite direction, using the maze of cubicles for cover. They found a fire exit at the far end of the building, but the push bar was rusted shut. As they frantically but quietly worked on the door, Noah glanced back down the long, dark corridor. His blood ran cold. He saw movement. Not just the 2 men. Silhouettes were flitting between the shadows. People were emerging from different offices. The building wasn't just occupied by 2 men. It was a hub, a nest. It was full of them. That horrifying realization gave them the final surge of adrenaline they needed. Liam threw his shoulder into the fire escape with a desperate shove. With a loud, groaning screech of rusted metal, it burst open. They didn't wait to see the reaction. They spilled out into the cool night and ran, not looking back until the office building was just a dark shape against the city lights. They had walked into a place that was not abandoned at all. It was a clandestine home to a community that lived by its own rules, and they were lucky to have escaped. Story 5. The Devil's Trailer. Our final story is a grim warning that some abandoned places are used for activities so dark they leave a permanent stain on the location. It's a tale from 2 explorers who stumbled upon a scene of calculated cruelty that would haunt them forever. The setting was a forgotten corner of a rural county, a patch of overgrown woods with a single, dilapidated trailer rotting away. For the explorers, Mark and Jessica, it seemed like an easy location. But the first sign something was deeply wrong was the door. Spray-painted in stark black was a large, crude pentagram. A sense of unease settled over them, but curiosity won. They pushed open the groaning door and stepped inside. The interior was even more unsettling. The air was thick with incense and something else, something metallic and foul. More occult symbols were painted on the walls. This wasn't teenage vandalism. The symbols were drawn with a deliberate, ritualistic intensity. The place felt like a makeshift church for something unholy. The main living area was cluttered with cheap candles and strange artifacts. But it was what they saw in the center of the room that made their stomachs turn. Hanging from the ceiling fan was a cat, suspended by its back legs, its body limp. It was a horrific sight. A clear case of ritual animal abuse. Mark stepped closer, his flashlight illuminating the scene. He was about to turn away when the unthinkable happened. The cat's head twitched. Its eyes, which they had assumed were lifeless, blinked open. It was still alive. Half dead, tortured, but alive. In a sudden burst of panicked energy, the cat began to struggle, letting out a weak, agonized cry. Mark and Jessica snapped out of their horrified trance. They had to get it down. Mark stood on a rickety chair, carefully cutting the rope while Jessica prepared to catch it. As the cat came free, it was terrified and in pain. It lashed out, scratching both of them before collapsing. They wrapped the poor creature in a spare jacket and rushed it to the nearest 24-hour vet, their minds reeling from the depravity they had witnessed. They couldn't shake the image of the pentagrams and the horrifying realization that they had walked into a place where people actively practiced cruelty. Miraculously, the vet told them the cat was expected to survive. While there was a glimmer of hope in the animal's survival, the experience left an indelible scar on Mark and Jessica. They had ventured into the woods looking for a piece of the past, and had instead found an active site of modern-day evil. They came face to face with the terrifying reality that the most monstrous things in this world aren't ghosts, but the darkness that can live inside the human heart.